Hi, guys, it's me, Mr. Bertoch, your incredibly handsome science teacher. And in this video, we, of all things, are going to talk about the weather. No, I'm not making small talk. We actually are going to talk about the weather in this video, and in particular, what is the weather and how is weather different than climate, and what are some of the things, some of the types of weather that we see, and how do seasons impact or affect the weather. So when you go outside and you go for a nice walk in your neighborhood and you look up above your head and you see what? You see clouds or a clear blue sky, or maybe if you're looking up and it's raining, then water hits you in the eye. You're like, I shouldn't have looked up. But whatever the conditions are on your walk at that particular moment, the conditions outside, like temperature and wind and cloudiness and precipitation, we call that the weather. So weather is something that is constantly changing in the short term. The conditions that are outside, temperature, wind, all the things I mentioned before, that are in the short term, that is weather. How is that different from what we call climate? Because climate refers to pretty much the same things: temperature and precipitation. Okay, so how is it different from weather? Well, weather is what's happening right now. That's the weather. Whereas climate is made up of averages over many, many years, usually about 30 years. And we look at those averages maybe in, let's say, a forest where you get a lot of rain, and you're like, okay, the climate here is rainy. And that's different than the climate in a desert where the climate is not very rainy. You don't get very much precipitation. However, it can rain in the desert. So you can have the weather can be rainy in the desert, even though the climate is dry. But every once in a while, just because it's usually dry, doesn't mean you're not going to get a weather event that brings a different kind of weather. So weather is the now, and climate is the long term, made up of all the weather events over an average of about 30 years or so. The weather changes in predictable ways throughout the year because of something called seasons. And of course, you are familiar with seasons if you live in the temperate zone where seasons occur each year. So what, pray tell, are the seasons? Well, of course, there is summer, and there is autumn or fall, and there's winter, and then there is spring, and then we go back into summer. And the weather is affected by the seasons in some important ways. For one, is the temperature, because the temperature changes throughout the year. It's much hotter in the summer, and so we can predict that you're probably going to have the weather is probably going to involve hotter temperatures. And it's much colder typically in the winter, so we can predict that you're going to have colder temperatures. When you make small talk, you're like, so how's the weather? Well, if it's winter, it's probably going to be colder. And if it is summer, it's probably going to be warmer. And then autumn and spring, well, they're harder to predict because they're kind of in between. And in autumn, you're going to have some warm or even hot days and some cold days, especially as you get towards the end of autumn. It gets colder and colder. And likewise, spring, but the opposite, right? It starts out colder and then it gets warmer and warmer and warmer towards summer, making a reasonable assumption or prediction that it's going to get warmer to be very likely to be accurate. So whether or not you understand the weather, I don't know, I'm just trying to use weather in a sentence. Whether you are anyway, all over the world, as various weather events are occurring, there are scientists who are called meteorologists. Meteorologist is a fancy sciencey word that just means a scientist who studies the weather and tries to make predictions about the weather. Meteorologists are collecting data. Data, depending on how you prefer to announce it, is very important in science because when we collect data, we can then look at the data and find and identify patterns. And those patterns help us to better understand the phenomena that we are studying, in this case, the weather. For example, you might see an anemometer, which is you could call it a wind detector. It's a little fan that is blown by the weather, or the wind, rather. The wind causes it to spin. And then we can measure, which is really pronounced measure, but it's more fun to say smeasure. We can measurify how fast the wind is going based on how fast that little fan is turning, and we can record the data on the wind speed at any given moment. And then later we can look back at the data and we can get an idea for the wind speed, the averages, the climate, because remember again, climate is long-term averages of wind in a particular location. Likewise, we collect the rainfall in little cups or little dishes, and we measure how much rain typically falls in a particular place. That's data that we're collecting. We use thermometers to gather data on the temperature, and we record that data. And then we take all of that data and we put it all together and we calculate averages, and then we have a pretty good understanding of the climate of an area, and we can use that data to help us make predictions about what type of weather is likely in a particular area based on the season. Hi guys, thanks for watching my video. These rambling science videos where I go unscripted and just kind of barf up all the science knowledge out of my head are part of a series that go along with an online class that I teach, which you can sign up for if you go to handsomescienceteacher.com. I also have a whole bunch of free resources for homeschoolers. I have hundreds of articles on every topic that covers your entire science curriculum from 5th through 8th grade. I have online games and quizzes, all curated and written by this handsome guy, a science teacher with, three degrees, but 2 of them are in science. So it's targeted right to and directly to your science students. So sign up. Subscribe to the channel, and I release lots of videos. Also, in addition to these ones, lots of little short videos that are like 2 minutes long that cover science topics. Those ones you don't get to see my handsome face, but they're still good videos, and they're much more targeted, and those ones are scripted, so you don't have to hear me like you are right now going blah, blah, blah. The end. Subscribe. Thank you. Goodbye.